A teacher told a 12-year-old black boy he didn't belong in advanced science class. The next morning, his grandfather rolled up in a Rolls-Royce and quietly turned the entire school upside down. The call came just past 10:15 in the morning. Marcus Freeman was elbow-deep under the hood of a beat-up Ford F-150, parked in the dusty backlot of his auto shop off Highway 41 in Macon, Georgia. Sweat beaded under his ball cap, his shirt clung to his back, and his mind was fixed on one thing: whether the radiator hose he was wrestling with would hold up another season. Then his phone buzzed. He wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag, picked it up, and heard the vice principal's voice, clipped and cold. "Mr. Freeman, we need you to come get your son." No explanation, no warmth, just an order wrapped in a tone that didn't invite questions. Marcus didn't argue. He never did. He tossed the rag aside, locked the garage, and drove to Lincoln Middle School, grease still caked under his nails. Inside the office, Caleb sat quietly on a plastic chair against the wall. His backpack was zipped tight, eyes fixed on the floor, hands clasped in his lap. No anger, no defiance, just stillness. The teacher, Ms. Harper, stood by the front desk, her smile tight and forced. White, mid-40s, dressed in beige slacks and a floral blouse that screamed, "I'm in charge," she greeted him with a familiarity that didn't land. "Marcus," she said, like they were old pals, "we had a bit of an issue in advanced science today." Marcus glanced at his son, then back at her. "What kind of issue?" She lowered her voice, like she was letting him in on a secret. "It's about placement. Caleb's struggling to keep up, and, well, I think we need to be realistic about expectations." Marcus's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed steady. "He's been pulling A's in science since 3rd grade. "I get that," she said, brushing her hair behind an ear, "but it's not just grades. He's not engaging. He hesitates. Honestly, I think it might be a confidence issue." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Or maybe it's how he's being treated." Her laugh was quick, polite, and uneasy. "Oh, it's not like that. We're just trying to find the right fit. He'd probably thrive in a more hands-on program, something better suited to his background." His face didn't shift, but his silence sharpened. "His background?" She gestured vaguely. "You know, his family, no offense. You run a farm, fix cars, honest work. I just think his strengths might shine brighter in something more practical." That's when Marcus knew. This wasn't about science or grades. It was about assumptions, the quiet, dangerous kind. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, grabbed Caleb's backpack from the chair, and looked at his son. "You good?" Caleb nodded once. Marcus turned back to Ms. Harper, his voice low but firm. "You say this school wants what's best for my boy." "Of course," she said, too fast. "Then don't count him out just because you don't see him." Before she could respond, he opened the door and Caleb followed him out, silent as a shadow. They crossed the parking lot, the Georgia sun blazing down. Marcus didn't speak until they reached his truck. He opened the passenger door, helped Caleb in, and shut it with a thud. Behind the wheel, he sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, anger simmering but held in check. He turned to his son. "You're not the problem, Caleb, you hear me?" "Yes, sir," Caleb said softly. "You don't belong there," Marcus said, tapping the wheel once with his palm. Caleb looked up, and Marcus met his eyes. "But she's right about one thing. You don't belong in a place that doesn't know who you are." They drove home in silence, not the kind that divides, but the kind that says everything worth saying. What no one saw coming was who'd show up at school the next morning. The next morning at Lincoln Middle School started like any other. Kids spilled out of yellow buses, backpacks thumping against their backs, sneakers scuffing the concrete. Teachers stood at the main gate, clutching coffee mugs, glancing at watches, barking about tardy slips. Everything was routine, until it wasn't. At exactly 7:45 a.m., a sound sliced through the morning chaos. Not loud, but unmistakable. The low, steady growl of an engine that didn't falter. Heads whipped around. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided down the school's front lane, its chrome grille gleaming like a crown in the early sunlight. Polished, elegant, and wildly out of place, it looked like it had rolled straight out of a movie. Eighth grader Tyler Brooks elbowed his buddy. "Yo, Is that a celebrity? Gotta be the mayor or something, another kid muttered. They were both wrong. The rear passenger door swung open, and out stepped a tall man in a sharp gray suit, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. A classic fedora sat on his head, a folded pocket square peeked from his jacket. Every move was deliberate, calm, like he owned the ground he walked on. Some recognized him instantly. Others whispered, "Wait, is that Caleb's grandpa?" It was James Freeman, former cattle broker, former land developer, and, as of last year, a retired philanthropist with a resume longer than a Sunday sermon. To most kids, he was just the guy who showed up at Caleb's science fair last fall and quietly bought lunch for every student who stayed late. James didn't make a scene. He circled the car, opened the rear door again, and Caleb stepped out, backpack slung over one shoulder, his face as focused and quiet as the day before. James rested a gentle hand on Caleb's back. "Ready?" Caleb gave a small nod. They walked toward the school's main entrance, and the sea of students parted like water. Miss Harper stood by the door, mid-bite into a bagel, and froze when she saw them. James didn't speak first. Caleb did. "Good morning, Miss Harper." Her mouth fell open. "Caleb, we weren't expecting—" James extended a hand. "James Freeman, I believe you spoke with my son yesterday." Miss Harper shook his hand weakly, fumbling for words. Yes, of course. I didn't know you'd be stopping by today." "I know," James said, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips. "But it's time we all got on the same page." He guided Caleb toward the main office, nodding at a few curious onlookers along the way. His steps were slow but sure, like a man who knew exactly where he was going and why. Inside, the secretary looked up, startled. "I'd like to speak with Principal Carter and Ms. Harper," James said, his voice steady as ever. "I've cleared my morning." The secretary blinked. "Of course, Mr. Freeman, just a moment." Caleb settled into the same chair from yesterday, but this time he didn't lower his head. James stood tall, hands clasped behind his back. The principal appeared moments later, trying to mask his unease. "Mr. Freeman, didn't expect you so early." "I'm not here to make a fuss," James said. "I'm here to ask a few questions." The principal shot a quick glance at Ms. Harper. "Of course. This way, please." James turned to his grandson. "Wait here, Caleb. I won't be long." "Yes, sir," Caleb replied. As James followed the two adults down the hall, Caleb watched. His heart pounded, but not from fear. Something else, something new, like the first time he felt someone truly had his back. Outside the front window, the Rolls-Royce sat gleaming at the curb. A cluster of sixth graders gathered behind it, peering through the tinted glass, whispering guesses about who the man in the suit really was. They had no idea. But he wasn't just there to drop off his grandson, he had a meeting to attend. The door clicked shut behind them. James Freeman stepped into the meeting room like he'd walked into 100 others. Clean table, dim fluorescence, chairs that creaked too easily. But it wasn't the furniture that set this room apart. It was the quiet strain etched across the faces, staring back at him. Principal Carter fidgeted with his tie, a wiry man in his early 50s stifling a small cough. Ms. Harper sat beside him, arms crossed tightly, her forced smile like a mask she'd forgotten how to remove. James didn't sit. He set a slim folder on the table, his hand resting on it, steady as stone. "I won't take much of your time," he began, his voice even, measured. "I understand there's concern about my grandson's placement in the advanced science program." Mr. Harper leaned forward, eager to fill the silence. "We want what's best for Caleb. We're trying to find the right environment for him to succeed." "Is that so?" James tilted his head slightly. "And what about this environment makes you think he can't?" Carter jumped in, visibly uneasy. "It's not that he's unqualified, it's just we've noticed some hesitation in his participation." "Hesitation," James echoed, the word hanging in the air. "Yes," Carter said. "A confidence issue. He rarely speaks up, shies away from group work. We thought it might signal discomfort." James opened the folder with deliberate precision, revealing a few neatly arranged papers, test scores, recommendation letters, old transcripts. He slid one across the table. "This is Caleb's standardized science test from last semester, 97th percentile nationwide." Miss Harper blinked. "I wasn't aware of that." "I was," James said, no trace of venom, just fact. And this, he passed another sheet, is a letter from Dr. Thompson at the university. Caleb attended her robotics workshop last summer, youngest in the program, fastest to solve the spatial logic test. Carter cleared his throat. Those are impressive achievements. They are, James said. So let me ask again, what makes him unfit? The room went still. Miss Harper's lips parted, but no words came. James eased into his chair, slow and deliberate, hands resting on the table. I've sat in rooms like this my whole life, he said. Some held real power, others just the illusion of it. But what I've always looked for is honesty. So, Miss Harper, tell me, what about my grandson made you decide he doesn't belong? Her face flushed faintly. I didn't mean he doesn't belong. I just thought there might be a better fit, something more practical, maybe tied to his skills, something like agriculture. Agriculture? James repeated, tasting the word. Because his father runs a farm and fixes engines. There's nothing wrong with that, she said quickly. You're right, James replied. Not a thing wrong with it. In fact, it's what built everything my family owns, including that car parked outside. Neither spoke. James leaned in, his voice low but piercing. Let's be clear. The problem isn't the program, it's your assumptions. You saw a quiet boy in worn shoes carrying a lunch that didn't come from the school cafeteria, and you drew a line around what he could be. You boxed him in without saying a word. Marcus didn't speak up yesterday, James went on. He knew arguing with you wouldn't change a thing. But I'm not here to argue. I'm here to set something straight. He stood, buttoning his jacket with a calm that filled the room. No appearance, no job, no bank account defines excellence. But there are people right here in this building trying to clip a child's wings before they even know how far he can fly. Carter spoke, softer now. What do you want us to do? James locked eyes with him. Let my grandson learn without being judged for anything but his mind. What James said next shifted the entire atmosphere of that school. He didn't sit back down. He let the weight of his words settle, heavy and undeniable. The room had changed. He could feel it. The air wasn't hostile anymore. It was exposed, raw, like a nerve laid bare. Principal Carter stole another glance at the folder, then at Ms. Harper, who stared at the table's edge as if it held answers she couldn't find. James gave them a moment, then pressed on, his voice still calm, still unshakable. I grew up in Albany, not far from here, he said. My father never made it past third grade, but he made damn sure we could read blueprints and calculate profit margins before we could drive a track. He loosened his jacket, the gesture casual but commanding. I worked cattle until I was 30, saved every penny I could, bought my first plot in Peach County in '79. When the banks wouldn't touch me, I bought junk equipment and fixed it myself. Guess who gave me my first line of credit? Carter shook his head slowly. Clara Jenkins, a secretary at First National, not the bank president, a secretary. She told me, Mr. Freeman, you make good on this, and maybe they'll start listening. He paused, letting it sink in. I made good, and then some. He let the silence stretch before continuing. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you because folks in this town, some in classrooms, some in offices, forget that success doesn't come in one shape. It doesn't always wear a college blazer or talk with a polished accent. Sometimes it shows up with calloused hands and a quiet voice. He turned to Miss Harper, his gaze steady. You looked at Caleb and decided he didn't fit. You didn't ask where he's from. You didn't ask what he can do. You just assumed. Her voice finally broke through, no longer defensive, just small. I didn't mean it like that. I believe you, James said, and that's worse. It means you didn't even see it. Carter shifted in his seat. Mr. Freeman, I can't thank you enough for coming in. It's eye-opening. James's tone didn't waver. It should have been obvious from the start, but I'm not here to scold. I'm here to crack the door open wider. He slid another paper across the table. This is a summary from the James and Evelyn Freeman Foundation. Over the past decade, we've funded 132 scholarships for underserved kids across Georgia. 7 of them graduated from Lincoln Middle. One's teaching biology in Savannah right now. Carter stared at the document, his mouth slightly open. "You've donated to this school?" he asked. James gave a slight shrug. "Not directly. Quiet support is often the most honest. But silence has a cost, and when it starts hurting kids, it's time to speak up." Ms. Harper clasped her hands, her face pale. "Mr. Freeman, I owe Caleb an apology." "You do," he said simply. "I thought I was guiding him," she added, almost to herself. James nodded once. "Then I hope today teaches you to ask questions instead of making assumptions." Carter stood, his voice softer but firm. "We'll reinstate Caleb in the program immediately. I'll personally ensure he gets the support, not judgment, he deserves." James offered a polite smile. "That's a start." He turned toward the door but paused just before opening it. "One more thing." Carter looked up. "Yes?" "I want to address the parent council tonight. Open meeting." "That might be tough to arrange on short notice," Carter said. James stopped him with a single look. "I think you'll find it's easier than you expect." James wasn't done. He wanted the parents to hear it too. By 6:30 p.m., the Lincoln Middle School cafeteria was packed to the brim. Metal folding chairs sat in uneven rows, some parents leaning against the back wall, arms crossed. A few teachers slipped in, whispering in tight clusters by the windows. Word had spread like wildfire. No one expected James Freeman to show up again, let alone demand a full parent council meeting. But there he was, standing calmly near the front of the room, hands clasped behind his back. No suit this time, just jeans and a dark brown jacket, the kind of outfit that said he didn't need to prove anything. He didn't need an introduction. Everyone knew who he was. Principal Carter sat in the front row, clutching a stack of legal pads. Miss Harper was a few seats away, eyes fixed ahead, her expression unreadable. James waited until the clock struck 7 sharp, then stepped to the microphone. No theatrics, no long-winded preamble, just the truth, plain and unyielding. "I'll keep this brief," he started, his voice steady. "I'm James Freeman. My grandson Caleb is a 7th grader here." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, eyes darted. James let it settle before continuing. "Yesterday, Caleb was pulled from his advanced science class. His teacher suggested he'd be better suited for something else, something more in line with his circumstances." He scanned the room, his gaze steady, unflinching. "I was raised to keep my head down, work hard, let the results speak. But silence doesn't always fix what's broken. Sometimes silence lets it grow." He paused, the weight of his words sinking in. "My grandson isn't failing. He's not slow. He's not disruptive, lazy, or lost. He's exceptional, but someone looked at him and decided exceptional doesn't look like him." A woman in the back cleared her throat and called out. "What'd she actually say?" James didn't blink. "She told his father he'd do better on a practical track. Because we run a farm, because we wear work boots." A low rumble stirred the crowd, some shifting uncomfortably, others tensing with recognition. James held up a single sheet of paper. "This is Caleb's latest science test score, higher than 90% of kids his age nationwide. That's not potential, that's proof." He lowered the paper. "This isn't just about one boy. It's about the assumptions we carry without noticing. It's about the quiet messages we send our kids, even when we don't say a word." A burly man in the front row, clutching a trucker hat on his knee, raised a hand. "So what do you want? You want her fired?" James shook his head. "No, I want her, and all of us, to learn." He turned directly to me. "You owe my grandson an apology, but more than that, you owe every kid in your class the truth. Intelligence doesn't belong to one group, one family, one zip code." He faced the parents again. "Tell a child they belong, and they'll rise. Tell them they're only good for certain things, and you've built a ceiling they'll spend their whole life breaking." A mother from the PTA, blonde bob, blazer, too crisp for the occasion, spoke up. "Why here? Why not take this straight to the school board?" "For over a decade, I've quietly funded this district," James replied. "Scholarships, grants, equipment. I believe in doing good without a spotlight. But what's the point of helping kids walk through a door if the people inside don't believe they belong?" The room fell silent, the kind of quiet that hums with realization. Principal Carter stood. "We're starting new training immediately, bias awareness, inclusive curriculum reviews, teacher workshops, no more waiting." A few parents clapped, tentative at first, then louder. James stepped back from the mic. No bow, no flourish, just a single nod before he returned to his seat beside Caleb, who'd been watching from the front row, quiet as ever. The boy's eyes were wide, not with fear but with something new, pride. As James took his seat, the room still hummed with the weight of his words. The applause faded, but the atmosphere didn't snap back to normal. Something had shifted, like an invisible wall that once divided the people in that cafeteria had cracked. The glances exchanged weren't curious or skeptical anymore. They carried self-reflection, a quiet acknowledgement that James's message wasn't just about Caleb. It was about all of them. A parent stood up, David Willis, who ran a small grocery store on Maple Street. He wasn't the type to speak at meetings, but his voice trembled with raw emotion. "Mr. Freeman," he started, pausing to steady himself, "I've got a daughter in 8th grade. She loves to draw. Last year, a teacher told her to focus on trade school because art's not realistic. I didn't push back. I thought the teacher was right. But now, I know I was wrong." A murmur spread through the crowd, not dissent, but recognition. Another parent, Rosa Hernandez, rose from the middle rows. "My son was put in remedial classes because he speaks Spanish at home," she said, her voice firm but heavy. "I tried telling the school he's smart, but they wouldn't listen. Hearing you tonight, Mr. Freeman, it's time I speak up." The room erupted, not in arguments but in stories. Fragments of small injustices, once buried, poured out, as if James had unlocked a door no one knew was there. A teacher, Ms. Jenkins, stood in the corner, raising a hand to apologize for overlooking students who didn't fit her mental image of a good student. "I have to do better," she said, her voice catching, "and I will." Caleb sat quietly, watching it all unfold. He didn't speak, but his eyes moved from his grandfather to the people standing up. For the first time, he felt like more than a kid who'd been misjudged. He was part of something bigger, a shift his grandfather had set in motion. A boy next to him, Ethan, leaned over and whispered, "Your grandpa's legit." Caleb gave a small smile, but inside, a spark ignited. Not anger, but resolve. James didn't stand again. He didn't need to. His words had taken root, rippling out like a stone dropped in a still lake, unstoppable. As the meeting ended, a group of parents gathered around him, not to flatter, but to ask how they could help, how they could ensure their kids weren't boxed in by assumptions. James kept it short, as always. "Listen to your children," he said, "and don't let anyone tell them they're not enough." As people filed out, the cafeteria's fluorescent lights still buzzed, but the shadows of old biases seemed to dim just a little. That night, the story of James Freeman and his grandson began to spread beyond the school walls to family dinners, front porch conversations, and quiet corners of Macon's coffee shops. A seed had been planted, and it was already starting to grow. What happened after the meeting was something no one saw coming. The next morning, Lincoln Middle School felt different. Not on the surface. Lockers still slammed, sneakers squeaked down the halls, and the morning announcements crackled through the ancient PA system. But beneath it all, there was a shift. A quiet one, but it was there. Caleb sat in his usual spot in science class, second row, third seat from the left. He didn't talk much. He never did. But he could sense something brewing. He felt it in the sidelong glances from his classmates, in the way no one interrupted when Miss Harper walked in. She stood by the whiteboard for a moment, staring at her notes. Then she set the marker down, turned to face the class, and took a deep breath, almost trembling. "I need to say something before we start," she began, her voice taut but steady. The room went silent. Even the kid chewing gum in the back stopped. "Yesterday, some of you might have heard things. You might have seen Caleb leave early. That was because of a decision I made. A decision I thought was fair, but I realize now it came from my own blind spots." She looked directly at Caleb, not past him, not over him, but straight at him. "I misjudged you. I saw your quietness as weakness. I saw your background as a barrier. I was wrong." A few kids turned to Caleb. He didn't shift in his seat, just met her gaze, calm as always. "I owe you an apology," Miss Harper went on. in front of your classmates, because that's where I messed up, and that's where the truth needs to be set right." She stepped closer. "You belong here, Caleb. Not because of your name, not because of your grandfather, but because you're brilliant, and because you care about this subject in a way a good teacher should have recognized." The silence held, not awkward, but heavy with understanding that something big was happening. Caleb finally spoke. "I still want to be in this class." His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Miss Harper's faint smile wasn't pride, it was relief. "I'd be lucky to have you stay." She turned back to the board. "Now let's talk about Newton's second law. You ready?" Caleb nodded once, but the change didn't stop there. At lunch, a group of kids he barely knew approached him. One of them, a tall girl named Layla who always claimed the front seat on the bus, asked, "Want to join our science fair project?" Another kid, Jamal, cut in. "Yo, I saw that robot video you made last year. That thing was fire. You really coded it yourself?" Caleb shrugged. "Most of it." They sat together. No big speeches, no awkward introductions, just kids eating sandwiches, talking gears and circuits. That same week, Principal Carter announced a new mentorship program, linking students with local engineers and professionals. James Freeman was invited to join the advisory board. He politely declined the spotlight, but agreed to fund materials, transportation, and guest instructors. "I don't want my name on anything," he said when asked. "Just make sure no kid gets left behind because their parents can't write a check." Teachers began to see differently. Kids who'd been passed over were suddenly offered spots in programs they'd never been considered for, not just because of Caleb, but because something had broken open. Sometimes a single moment can shift how a town sees the world. Sometimes a quiet boy becomes a mirror, showing everyone what they'd ignored. But James left behind one final message, one that echoed in Macon long after he was gone. He didn't stick around to bask in the aftermath. He'd said what needed saying, and he wasn't one for chasing praise. A week after the parent meeting, he sent a handwritten note to the principal and slipped back into his rhythm. Mornings tending the land, evenings lost in books, Sundays in the same church pew he'd claimed for 3 decades. But before he stepped back completely, he asked Caleb for a walk. It was a Saturday, warm and heavy with the scent of damp earth and cut grass. They wandered along the edge of the family's property, past rusted equipment standing like silent tributes to years of grit. James wore his old work boots, not the polished shoes of that first day, boots with worn soles and cracked leather, carrying the weight of a life built by hand. "Heard you stuck with that class," he said, eyes on the horizon. "Yes, sir," Caleb answered. "And your teacher, how's she holding up?" Caleb's lip quirked, almost a grin. "Still working on it, I think." James let out a low chuckle. "Good. Some folks take longer to grow." They walked on in silence for a bit. "I know you wanted me to fight," James said after a moment. "You didn't say it, but I saw it in your eyes that day, when your dad didn't push back, when you thought we'd let it go." "I didn't get why he stayed quiet," Caleb admitted. "He just walked away." James stopped, turning to face his grandson. "Your father's been fighting his whole life, just not the way they expect. Sometimes the strongest people are the quietest ones in the room." Caleb looked down, processing. "So why didn't you stay quiet?" "Because it was time," James said. "Not for me, for you. If I didn't speak up, they'd try to box you in, make you fit their limits. And once a boy believes the ceiling someone else built, it's hard to tear it down." They stood beneath the shade of an old oak, planted by James's father when he was Caleb's age. James leaned against its rough bark. "Listen close, son. You'll walk into rooms where people size you up before you say a word. Some will write you off the second they hear your name, see your shoes, or know where you're from." He paused, his voice firm but warm. "But what they don't know, what they can't know, is what's in you, what you've seen, what's been built into you." Caleb nodded, slow and steady. "Never mistake a soft voice for weakness," James said, "and don't let anyone tell you your roots mean you're stuck in the dirt. They lingered there, no lecture plan, no speech rehearsed, just 2 generations sharing a path, one having cleared the way for the other." By the end of the year, Caleb took second place at the state science fair, not because of a famous name or a flashy car, but because he'd built something real, a prototype irrigation system for low-income farms. He called it the silent circuit. When asked why, he said, because even quiet things can make a difference. Back at Lincoln Middle School, Ms. Harper began each semester with a new message in bold letters across her classroom wall. Potential isn't always loud. You have to look for it. Some kids glanced at it, others ignored it. But those who'd been there the year Caleb sat in silence, they remembered. They remembered the Rolls-Royce, the man in weathered boots, and the boy who didn't shout but still made the world listen. Because sometimes the truest lessons aren't taught in a classroom. They are lived by those bold enough to speak when it counts. One voice, raised at the right moment, can break barriers and inspire change. Never underestimate the power of standing up for what's right. But what about you? What assumptions are you holding on to? Who might you be limiting without realizing it? If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and join us for more tales of courage and transformation. Let's keep the conversation going.